is anger in the Christian. And anger is something we don't talk a lot about in the church because, frankly, it's an uncomfortable topic. Anger, it makes angry people angry. But I think sometimes avoiding problems rarely makes them go away. And so I think it's wise to consider looking at this from a biblical perspective. But before we get into the Bible, I have to give you kind of a humorous story. And there was a gal named Judy who walked into a jewelry store, and she found a perfect little necklace, had diamonds in it and all this. And she really liked it. And she went to the clerk and says, "Excuse me, how much would it cost for you to hold this until my husband does something unforgivable?" You know, a lot of times we're Christians, we're a little bit like that. It's not a matter of if somebody's going to make us angry, is when are they going to make me angry? We have a problem in the sense that we do not seem to handle anger well. And the Bible has a few things to say about it. And we're going to start in James 1, verses 17 through 27. It says, "Every good and perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of heavenly lights, who does not change like shifting shadows. He chose to give us birth through the word of truth, that we might be kind of first fruits of all created. My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. Because human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. Therefore, get rid of all moral filth and evil that is so prevalent, and humbly accept the word planted in you, which can save you. Do not merely listen to that word and so deceive yourself. Do what it says. Anyone who listens to the word but does not do what it says is like someone who looks at his face in a mirror and after looking at himself goes away and immediately forgets what he looks like. But whoever looks intently into the perfect law that gives freedom and continues in it, not forgetting what they have heard, but doing it, they will be blessed to do what they do. Those who consider themselves religious and yet do not keep a tight rein on their tongues deceive themselves, for their religion is worthless. Religion that God our Father accepts is pure and fruit is this: to look after orphans and widows in their distress and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world. This is, in fact, a recipe on how to live a Christian life. And I think when we look at anger, we too often consider it simply as a sinful behavior. But there is a Christian counselor and pastor named David Seamands, who I personally prefer a lot of his counseling. In fact, it was one of his books, Healing Damaged Emotions, that I used when I went through counseling, that I found quite helpful. But a statement that he wrote on anger is that anger is a divinely implanted emotion, closely allied for the right. It is designed to be used in constructive spiritual purposes. The person who cannot feel anger at evil is a person who lacks enthusiasm for good. If you cannot hate wrong, it is very questionable whether you can really love righteousness. And I think that's kind of a profound statement, that God gave us anger. But does it work the way God designed it? And I would suggest not. In fact, if you look at Facebook, which I know many of you avoid at all costs, but there is nothing but arguments, political debates, and the full spectrum of anger. Anger at politicians, anger at immigrants, anger at everything. fact, there's just about all the people are angry at something, and many are just angry at angry people. It seems to be a self-feeding frenzy, that the more angry their people are, the more anger grows. But if it's, as David Seaman says, a divinely implanted emotion, it suggests that we should become angry at the wrongs that are in the world, that we should be angry when innocents are slain. I was on the wings of Refuge Board of Directors, and of course I've explained many times, we get women out of human trafficking and restore them back to health and a hopefully successful life. And I'm here to tell you, human trafficking makes me angry. And I hope it always does. I never want to be complacent looking at it and say, oh well, just another problem. Nothing I can do about that. If anger drives me to seek resolution, to help, to deal with, and helpfully make a difference in that world, then my anger is doing wonderful things. But if my anger causes hate and desire to do evil myself, then it becomes destructive. You see, Satan knows the power of anger. He knows just exactly how to trigger us and take something that God meant for good and make it destructive. I know very well that my anger can and does and has led me down sinful behavior. And he will continue to use that until we're aware of it and become to the point where when he does tempt us to go down there, that we know it and recognize it for what it is. I will never desire to deal with situations where wrong does not anger me. However, when I take that anger and misapply it, I not only become unchristlike, I become destructive. There's a Peanuts cartoon where Lucy was saying to Charlie Brown, I hate everything. I hate everybody. I hate the whole wide world. Charlie Brown responded, but I thought you had inner peace. And Lucy says, I do have inner peace. I just still have outer obnoxiousness. And I think too often I resemble Lucy. I want things to go differently. And too often I let anger take me into an unchristlike attitude. Because unfortunately, Satan knows it's an emotion that I can definitely be tricked into. Mark 7:14 through 15 reads, again, Jesus called the crowd to him and said, listen to me, everyone, and understand this. Nothing outside a person can defile them, but going into them. Rather, it is what comes out of the person that defiles them. We just read that similar verse in Matthew in Bible study. But what Jesus is saying is what is going on inside your heart is what's going to be the problem. Anger comes from a very deep place in you. And I'm here to tell you, I've had my fair share of experience. As a young person growing up, I was an extremely angry person. I had an abusive father. I lived in a very toxic, non-valuing environment. And I'm here to tell you that breeds anger. And I've certainly had more than my share of anger. The problem is, anger requires justice. In fact, it demands it. Yet, too often in life, we don't see justice. We, in fact, see injustice, which only triggers our anger even deeper. The fact that there are thousands and thousands of people trapped in slavery makes me angry. Not too many years ago, right after Wings of Refuge started, we had to turn 18 women away because we had no beds. And that made me angry. So what do I do with that anger? Now I'm here to tell you, there's a part of me growing up in a violent world that says, the solution might be, I need to get me a .30-06 rifle and I need to go out pimp hunting. Get rid of some of those traffickers. That's one response to anger. And that response would both be not godly, certainly not Christ-like, and would guarantee me a spot in jail. Rightfully so, by the way. On the other hand, if that anger spurs me to do what I can to fight trafficking, if it spurs me to support an organization, if it spurs me to pray for the people trapped in that environment, then my anger becomes a righteous anger. And it is that part of me that God desires for my anger to be part of. We must seek anger as a godly emotion, not as what Satan would twist it to become. In Mark 7:21-31, it says, "For this is from within, outside of," let me start that again. "For it is from within, out of a person's heart, that evil thoughts come. Sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, greed, malice, deceit, lewdness, envy, slander, arrogance, and folly. All these evils come from inside and defile a person." In that same way, anger, because it is such a rooted emotion, can and will be twisted by Satan if we allow him. It can be used for great good. It can also be the catalyst for great evil. It is said that a lady once came to Billy Sunday, a well-known evangelist in the early 1900s. And after hearing a message on hatred and anger, it was pricking her conscience just a little bit. And she came up to Billy Sunday and says, "You know what? There's nothing wrong with my anger. I blow up and then it's over. It's just a temporary thing." Billy Sunday responded, "So does a shotgun. And look at the damage it leaves behind." Her attitude was, "You know what? My anger's okay. It's no problem." His point was, if it's not godly anger, it does leave destruction. Non-godly anger will always cause destruction. Ben Franklin made the comment that anger is never without reason, but seldom a good one. Anger can be the catalyst for great good. It can be the motivation that drives a Christian to seek justice, to seek things that go on, and do better things. Or it can fuel hatred, anger, and destruction in a way that is unimaginable, even in our world. We must understand this single emotion has the power of great good and great evil at the same time, depending on how we view it and how we handle it. Another story about a woman who was bitten by a dog who turned out to be rabies, and this was before the treatment was good enough to stop it. And so the doctor says, "You might want to make out a will." So she started writing. And she kept writing, and she kept writing, and the doctor goes, "That's some will." She goes, "Will? I'm writing a list of people I'm going to bite." Revenge and anger are often intertwined. But I'm here to tell you, revenge does not become, or should be confused with justice. God makes it very clear, vengeance is mine and belongs to him alone. We must understand the difficulty that anger will cause us if we do not control it, if we do not understand it. But it also points out something that I think we understand very little about anger, and William Penn puts it quite clearly. It says, "It is he who is wrong who first gets angry." The truth of it is, my friends, in my own history and then what I've seen as a police officer, anger will often mask my own guilt. In fact, my anger will often betray sin in my own life. It will oftentimes show me for what I really am, which is a flawed and flawed human being. When anger is done in godly manners, it seeks to bring justice. But in a human state, it will very often create more injustice and division. Anger has the power to correct injustices or to create them. And sometimes we just do not make the point of understanding which is what. And I'm here to tell you that whenever we have a discussion on anger, and I've had a few with several people that struggle with it just as much as I did, there's always going to be those that say, you know, you're right, anger may not be good, but look at Jesus. He got angry. He drove the money changers out of the temple. And he was angry. Anybody that tries to argue differently wasn't reading that scripture. He grabbed a whip and he drove them out. But he was seeking justice. He was upset by the corruption of them taking advantage of him. We are, as Christians, called to action. I think too often, as Quakers, we are often thought of as passive, not doing anything. And yet, our history would suggest that Quakers were always a people that desired to correct injustice. They oftentimes spoke loudly, and to people who objected. They oftentimes found themselves at odds with their neighbors and even the government, especially during the anti-slave movement. We must understand that God gave us anger to transform the lives that we are in. Just as Jesus cleansed the temple, he gives us anger to see wrong and desire to correct it. But I have to understand that my anger is very much like a gun. Now, I'm a gun guy, so I use gun analogies pretty well. But when I train someone who's never handled a gun, there's 5 or 6 simple rules that you always have. One of them is muzzle awareness. Where's that muzzle pointing? Because it's easy to get careless and have that gun point in the wrong direction. But another thing that is hard, there's 2 dangerous people with guns. Those who don't have any experience with them because they don't know what they're doing. The other dangerous people with a gun are those who've carried it all their lives and become careless. They're reckless because they just don't recognize that what they're carrying is a deadly weapon that is meant for definite harm. Anger is very much like a firearm. It can be used for good. It can also be used for tremendous evil. And as a Christian, I must be aware when anger is in my body, which of those 2 I'm doing. Ephesians 4, verses 25 to 27. Therefore, having put away falsehood, let each one of you speak the truth of his neighbor, for we are members of one another. Be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your anger, and give no opportunity to the devil. To tell you that you should never be angry is ridiculous. It's a God-given emotion. Yes, you will and you should get angry at certain things. But just like that gun, you must be aware that that emotion holds significant power and danger. It can become as destructive as it gets. But it also has the power to motivate for great and wonderful good. Christians throughout the world and throughout time, through their anger, have done wonderful things for society out of their anger. But it also has the power to destroy. Satan will utilize any opportunity he can to corrupt anger, to become destructive, to divide us, to make us division in our churches. And we must be aware of that. And we also must be cognizant of the fact that if used improperly, anger will not only harm myself, but others, often unintentionally. God calls us to live in peace, and he promises us peace that surpasses all understanding. But I can tell you from my own experience, you will not experience that peace while you cling to anger and let Satan utilize it for destructive and divisive purposes. Always remember, this is a God-given emotion, meant for a very specific and narrow purpose. And when used for such, it will do what it's supposed to do. When misused, it will destroy not only the person who is angry, but those around them. And my friends, with such a powerful emotion, we need to be cautious. Thank you.